Welcome, everyone, to another session of TriTech University. My name is Bill Steppen, and we're going to be continuing our module mechanics series. Sorry about that. Got a little scatterbrain there for just a second. We are talking today about contact management and emailing. So the idea here is the contact management module is an extension of the customer module. So it's primarily used for keeping track of correspondences both in and out of your organization to your customers or even your potential customers. And I'm bundling that together with a talk about the email capabilities as well, because I think the email capabilities quite often get overlooked. We're going to talk about how you can take advantage of the built-in email function so that you don't have to worry about trying to do a whole lot of email management outside of the program. Now, there's quite a few things that it can be used for. There's also maybe a few things that you might want to consider doing outside of the program. So we'll talk about some of those strategies today. But as always, before we get too far into the conversation, just a few housekeeping things, some few house rules. So we are using GoToWebinar, and if you've never attended a GoToWebinar session before, or if this is your first time, first of all, welcome. And second of all, you have a GoToWebinar toolbar on your screen. And that toolbar is going to be how not only you control the meeting from your perspective, but also how you communicate with me. There is a questions bar in that toolbar, and if you have any questions at all related to the content at any time throughout this session, feel free to punch those into that questions box, and they will come straight up onto my screen where I will have a chance to review them and answer them as time allows and as I see them come in. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end, as always, so if I don't get to them right away, I'll definitely get to them at that point. Now, if that being said, with that GoToWebinar toolbar, if it is taking up too much screen real estate, if you're having a hard time seeing specifically what I have up on screen or anything along those lines, if it's blocking some parts, there is a little orange button with a white arrow on that toolbar, and you can click on that to shrink the toolbar off to one side of the screen or the other. And that way you get your full attention to my presentation here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about contact management. So the way contact management works is you'll notice that when we're looking at maintenance or modules here up on the drop-down ribbon menu, there's not a specific listing specific to contact management. Instead, you're going to find it kind of nestled within the customer module. As I said, it's best kind of thought of as an extension of that module. So you'll notice there's a line item here for contact management within the customer's module menu. Further down in the utilities, there's a contact management utilities function that we'll be looking at. Over in the maintenance portion, again, underneath customers, you're not even going to see anything specifically named contact management here. Instead, what you're going to see, excuse me, are some options known as actions and action groups. And that's going to be kind of the core of your contact management experience. We're going to be talking about that in just a moment. Now, the other thing I do want to mention in relation to contact management is it can be used for things kind of technically even outside of customer maintenance or customer correspondence. The idea behind contact management is it's a way to make sure that you're keeping track of not only all of your correspondences, but it can also be used in other ways too. I'll talk about some of the ways that we use it here in-house at TriTech, and some of the ways that I use it kind of specifically for my daily responsibilities as well. And that you might find that helpful in your implementation of the module, or and maybe even in some strategies for how you might go about using it to your advantage as well. Now, along that same line, when it comes to email, you'll notice that there is no specific email maintenance dropdown or module dropdown. And we're going to go into a lot more detail with email once we kind of get through contact management. But just so you are aware, its primary element is actually going to be found in your workstation settings. So when we're looking in workstations, you may have noticed that there is a specific tab for communications within your workstation settings. And basically, your details are going to be here as far as your outgoing mail server and things of that nature. So we're going to come back on that once we get into the email elements. But to get started with contact management, as I was explaining, contact management at its core is consisting of a series of what are known as action codes. Now, underneath maintenance and customer, there is an add change actions element here. Now, in version 12, you can assign these to particular employees. You can also flag whether or not they're inactive or things of that nature. But this is pretty much unchanged from version 11 if you're coming from that. Of course, if you're starting brand new with version 12, of course, this is all brand new. But the idea behind actions is you're going to have a case. Contact management is made up of cases, and a case is assigned to a particular employee. It's assigned underneath a particular customer account. It's assigned an action code, and then there's a series of notes, both kind of for starting notes and follow-up or resolution notes, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a few screens here just to kind of have all up on the screen simultaneously. So here in the actions, you can see that we've got a number of kind of default actions here. Now, none of these are going to be when you load up your program, just so you are aware. Your action listing is essentially going to be kind of a clean slate. This is just kind of a demo series of actions that I've got here. You can see that they range in a couple of different groups. We've got a couple of groups called collections, and then we also have a group for miscellaneous and sales groups. Now, your groups themselves can be established in that same menu underneath maintenance and customers, underneath a section called add change action groups. Now, the action groups are not specifically a necessity. You could technically have actions that are groupless, but this is a handy way of grouping different types of actions together. So again, it kind of along the thought process of how you might go about using your contact management. And again, its primary element is for keeping track of correspondences. Let's say that you want to have a series of actions relating to the follow-up sale. So you might have action group associated with that. You might have a follow-up for after the sale, so maybe something along those lines as far as the action group is concerned, so maybe current customers or something to that effect. Now, what we have here is we have basically a sales group, and we have a collections group, and then we have these miscellaneous groups as well. So if you look at the codes that we have as examples, you can see we don't have a whole lot as far as the miscellaneous group is concerned. We have a thank you card sent, and we have a refund due customer action code. As far as sales are concerned, we have a call in, we have a web inquiry, we have a hot prospect, we have a sold, and we have a sent proposal. And then as far as collections are concerned, again, in our particular example, we have a number of different collection codes kind of along the lines here, because collections are probably one of the biggest things that your store might be dealing with if you are someone who deals in long-term contracts or anything along those lines. You know what a chore it can be to get the customer to pay sometimes. And if they do go into collections, then quite oftentimes they don't want to be found. So you can see that there are a number of codes here relating to that. We've got home phone disconnect, we've got home phone left message on machine. I'm not going to read every single one of these. You can kind of read the screen yourself and get the gist of it, but you can see a lot of different things here in relation to collections. Now, the idea behind this, if we think about this as we go into contact management itself, and we're going to look at contact management in one of two ways. Now, as I mentioned, if we go to the modules menu and to customers, and then we go to contact management, the idea behind this way, approaching contact management in this manner, is you're going to see any and all cases that you have open specific to the employee that you are logged in as. So if I grab my highlighter, you can see we're logged in as default employee. And when we go into contact management, we're looking specifically at the cases that are open for that particular employee. So that's what I'm trying to draw your attention to there is depending on which way you come into contact management, you're going to see a different initial set of cases. Now, basically, this table here in the middle of the screen, if I grab my little spotlight tool, this table here is going to be made up of what we're calling cases. So a case is basically an instance of a correspondence. You can see that what you're going to see on the cases of the table are the date, the reference number, the employee, the contact name, the action code, the action date, the account name and number, and then the state. Now you can drag and drop these into any order you like. So if you prefer to have the date and the action date together, you can kind of drag them around in whichever way you want them. But then as you highlight a case, and we're going to see this in just a moment, I'm just kind of giving you a preliminary. But as you highlight a case, you'll notice that there are some spots down below as well. So there's a field here, there's a field here, and then there's a field down below. Now, when you're coming into this screen, up along the top, if I grab my highlighter tool, up here, you could think of this as kind of a way to search your initial batch of cases. So again, when you first come into contact management in this manner, we're specifically looking at the cases open for the employee that you're logged in as. Everything else, apart from the fact that it's focusing on open as opposed to closed, is going to be wide open. So the groups and actions are left as all. The date fields are kind of spanning all dates. The reference number field is empty. The keyword fields here are empty. And the idea behind all of these different fields is you can do a search for a correspondence based on a particular date or action date or a particular code, a particular keyword within either keyword 1, which is the first field here. So if I kind of do, let's do this. Let me grab the highlighter tool and let me kind of color code these. So if I do keyword 1, this would search any notes that you have in the first field, the first notes field. If we do keyword 2, let's make that one be, that's not working. I guess I have to do pen. Okay, so if I do keyword 2, apparently highlighters can't be changed colors. If you do keyword 2, then it's going to search this field. And if you do keyword 3 down here, then whatever you type into keyword 3 search would search any text down here in this field. So now that I've got a nice colorful mishmash of color on the screen, let me go ahead and clear all that out. So let's take a look at what a case can actually look like now. So down on the bottom, you have an add button. And when you add a case, when you're adding it specifically through contact management from the customer menu, it's going to ask you who the customer is. So let's go ahead and select our number one customer, Mr. Mike Anderson. And this will open up a contact management add or edit screen. So basically, whoever the name of the contact is, and maybe this is Mike, and it doesn't always have to be Mike. If we're talking about maybe we actually spoke with Mike's cousin Amy or wife Sarah or daughter Jill or whomever it is that we actually spoke with, that would be the name of the person that goes into the contact field. This can especially be beneficial if we're talking about correspondences that you have with institutions. So if we're talking about like a school or some other kind of organization, oftentimes there are a number of different folks that you're looking to speak with and that you have spoken with. So the contact field here in those cases is going to be something that's especially useful for you, not only as a way to search who you spoke with, but then also a means of keeping track of who you spoke with so that later on you can go back and have that in your records. Now below that, you can choose your group and action. Now you can leave the group as is. You could say all groups, and this would then show you all of the actions affiliated with any group, regardless of what group it's in. But if you've got a lot of different action codes, and maybe you're trying to just get to the handful of codes that are relevant to your particular department, for example, if we do pick a group, then you're going to see that we're seeing just the action codes related to the group. You could kind of think of it as the same idea of inventory category and subcategory, if that's helpful. Although it's not exactly the same beast because you can't pick a subcategory without first picking a category, but you get the idea, hopefully. Now, the idea here is that there is both a date. So I'm going to grab my highlighter here. There's a date, which you'll see over here to the right. And then there's also an action date. Now, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see my field that's highlighted, but what I want to do is I want to kind of show you as I'm tabbing through these fields. So if you're like me and you're doing a lot of customer correspondence notes and you're keeping your hands primarily on the keyboard, you're probably tabbing through these fields. So when you go first off from the contact, you tab and it goes down to the group field, and then from there to the action field, and then from there it goes through this action date field. It also makes a stop at the pop-up tab, and then it comes up here to the customer slot, and then it also makes a stop here at the closed box. We'll talk about what closed means in just a moment. And then it goes from there into the color field and then the attach field, and finally it gets over here to the date field. Now the idea between action date versus date. Typically, this date is not going to change. The idea behind this date is it's meant to be an initiation date. When was this case actually keyed in? In this case, February 27th at 1:14 p.m. But in the case of the action date, let's say that we're doing something that wants to have, you want to have some kind of follow-up or some kind of resolution. Maybe it's an open case as opposed to a closed case, and you want to be reminded of when you want to take action on this activity. So let's go to collections, or let's stick with sales, because sales is pretty straightforward. You can see that we've got a couple that are specific to call in, hot prospect, etc. Let's say it's a call in, and down here in this first notes field, we could put in a note saying, Mike phoned in inquiring about a new tenor saxophone. And if you're not in the gun industry, or if you're not in the music industry, if you're in the gun industry or the sewing industry, just play along. That could easily say new holster or new sewing machine or whatever it might be. So basically, the idea is in this first field, it's kind of an idea of why this case exists to begin with. Now, let's say that over here in the second box, we're going to look into a brand name, because offhand I'm not good on brand names, and get back to Mike. Now, the idea here is you want to, of course, be in a timely manner of getting back to customers. So let's say we want to get back to them by the end of this week. We can flag the action date to be, let's say, um, March 1st, so Friday, March 1st, and let's say we want to try and get back to them at 10 a.m. in the morning. So we can put in that as our action date. Basically, this is something that you could then sort by when you're looking at your open caseload. And if we want to be specifically reminded, let's say we actually want to phone him back at that time, we can flag it with a pop-up. And that means that basically, regardless of what's happening at the time, as long as you're logged into a computer as this employee, then what will happen is at that time, something will pop up on screen and it will say, Mike, action call in for this day and time. And then you'd be able to double click on it and actually see the pop up there in that respect. So that's kind of the idea, is it's a way to make sure that you are following up in a timely manner with your customers, especially in the cases of sales or collections or really anything. These are just examples. The sky's the limit when it comes to how you want to make use of contact management. Dennis is asking a question. It's confusing to have two fields labeled date. I hope TriTech will consider changing the labels to specify action date versus open date. Yeah, that's certainly something that we can definitely look into. I think it's implied that because this is over in the action area, but yeah, I can see how that might be confusing. So. And I think it was specifically labeled as action date in version 11 and older. So I can put that into our development team to see about a relabel there. Now, this third field down here, as far as the private notes, thank you very much, Dennis, by the way. This private notes area is something that we'll talk about more in depth here in just a moment. But basically, it's a way to separate any notes from the initial reason for the case versus the follow-up or resolution. So if there's anything ongoing that is kind of kept separate from that, this can go down into the private notes area. So that's kind of the idea. Let's go ahead and save this. And what we're going to see now is back here in our open contact management notes specific to the default employee that I'm logged in as, this is going to show up right away. Now, again, if you sort, let's say, by action date, then you can kind of group them in that manner so that you're looking at them in order of follow-up. But you could group by any of these, and as is the case with anything in version 12, when you are wanting to do a filter, you can click on any of these contains boxes and filter very quickly through what it is specifically that you're looking for. So I'm going to leave that open. And what I want to do now is I want to approach this from a different manner. By the way, Dennis is also asking another question. If you're not logged in when a pop-up reminder is scheduled to show, will it show the next time the employee logs in? And yes, that is the case there, Dennis. It will pop up essentially the next time that employee does log in or even clock in technically. So yeah, excellent question there. So as you might recall, as what I was specifying is that when you go into contact management in this manner, you're seeing specifically the open cases for that particular employee. And every time you add a case, it's going to ask you who the customer is for the new case. Now, you can approach this from a different angle. You can approach this from a customer history perspective. So instead, if we go to modules and customer and then customer history, and then of course, if we select that customer, then one of the options that you have in the drop down here in the history is for contact management. And when we click on go for this, now what you're going to see is you're going to see this same screen, but you're seeing a few different things as far as default searches. The default now is not specifically by employee. You can see that this is actually saying all employees up here. And it's also showing us any closed cases in addition to open cases. So the idea here, if you want to think about contact management again as kind of a correspondence utility, when you're looking at contact management from an individual perspective, so the employee wanting to see what their correspondence history is for the day, if they're using this as kind of a make sure I'm following up with prospects or with collections or with whatever it is that I'm tasked to, you're looking just at your open cases. No real need to look at your open cases because those are all resolved. Um, and you're looking specifically at your cases regardless of customers. You can see how this is actually focusing specifically on the individual customer. When you're looking at it from a customer's perspective, you want to see all the correspondences regardless of whether they're considered open or closed or who the correspondence was associated with as far as the employee. So let's say Mike phones in and says, hey, I was talking to so-and-so about a saxophone. Well, what you could do is you could go into contact management, and then that way you don't have to worry about doing a search by employee or by customer. You're already looking at the customer cases for that particular customer, and then what you could do is you could type in saxophone or sax or whatever you want to look up by. This is kind of assuming that the customer, or excuse me, the employee has spelled things correctly. That's neither here nor there. But basically, when you do a search, then what it would do, and of course, there's just the one case there, but it would come back and it would try and find any of those matches. And it's probably looking, you probably would want to do a wildcard search with something along those lines. And then basically what that would do is that would find any specific matches, regardless of whether it's an exact match or not. But that's kind of the idea behind using the keyword searches. You're not going to be able to use a filter dropdown like you are here in the tables themselves, but the keyword searches are nice and fast and accurate. And that's kind of the idea there. You could also then filter by action date or by date. If you know that you had spoken with the customer in a certain period of time, or if you were supposed to follow up with them within a certain period of time, you can certainly then do searches by those different dates. So that's kind of the idea of the search bars up top. Let me know if this is making sense or not, because I use this so often that sometimes this is basically our bread and butter here at TriTech. So for example, I wanted to give you some other use cases. We use contact management in-house for your support instances. So when you phone in with an issue or a question or anything like that, we have a whole series of action codes relating to whether it's an open support case or whether it needs to go to development or whether it's being reviewed by development or whatever the case might be. So if you've ever logged into our member portal and you go in and you look at your case history, and you might have seen that there are some options there as far as the cases being labeled as resolved or support review or development high priority. Those are action codes that we have in our own internal contact management system. Sales uses the same thing for their prospective cases. So when they're looking to maybe follow up with a customer or a prospective customer after a demonstration of the program, they have their action codes so that they can search by those and make sure that they're essentially making the best job possible of following up with customers and making sure that the customer is, of course, getting what they need as well. Excuse me. So that's kind of the idea there. Now, as far as these cases are concerned, you can use these cases outside of just basic correspondence. And one other thing I do want to point out here before I get too far away from this, something that I want to make sure everyone is aware of is, and hopefully by now everyone is aware that you can use F6 to search for things when we're in a lot of these different fields. But when it comes to these text fields, F4 can be handy as well. So F4 is a date timestamp, and F4 lets you put in specifically the day, the date, the time and the employee ID of who was logged in at the time. So let's say Mike phoned in and was talking about the saxophone, and let's say he said he's going to go with it. So over here, and maybe default employees said they were going to look into a particular brand name. Then later on, someone else who was logged in and took the call, they follow up with their own pop-up. So maybe this doesn't say default. Maybe this says L Smith or whatever their employee ID is, and it could say something to the tune of Mike phoned in and said he really likes the Yamaha or whatever it might have been. So that way, you don't have to worry about opening a completely new case. You can basically put that in there as a note, and then the next time the original employee logs in to check their notes, they'll see that there as an additional note on the case. And what you may even want to do, and this is more of an internal strategy than anything else, but in addition to popping up when the correspondence is due to be followed up with, if there is no current pop-up, what you may even want to do is flag it with the current day and time. So what you could do is you could come in here and hit T when you're in there, basically as of the time that the additional note was put in, and then flag it for pop-up. And then getting back to kind of what Dennis was saying, will it pop up the next time the employee logs in? Well, then that's exactly what will happen, is because now with the date time being specifically as of right now and flagged as pop-up, then the next time this employee logs in, they will get that immediate notification, hey, something happened with this case. Now, you can use it however you would like to use it, of course. This is, again, just something that we often do here in-house in TriTech. Let's say if a particular one of our support technicians is looking into something and they didn't have an action date particularly labeled on it because it's something that they're continuing to look into, and they're going to get back to to you or whomever the customer is as soon as they have a resolution. If the customer then calls back and says, hey, I just wanted to let you know when I do this, something else happens. So one of another support technicians could add that to the case, flag it as pop-up, and then the next time that employee is in, maybe they're out of the office that day or whatever the case may be, but that way they'll get an immediate notification of it when they log in. So that's pop-ups specifically with contact management. So hopefully that can be helpful as kind of, again, some thoughts behind that. Now, one thing I also kind of glossed over is this whole color concept. You could, let's go ahead and save those changes. You can color code your cases. Now, they're not going to be searchable by color, but in some cases, adding a particular color to a case can help it stand out. So when there is no color, it's going to show up just like you see here. Now you can right click on a case from this menu, and there's a handful of kind of pre-selected colors that it could be flagged as. So we could highlight it green, and you can see how it's now got a tinge of green to it. You can highlight it red. You can highlight it blue, you can highlight it orange, but if you're going into the case directly, and I just double clicked on the case to open it, you could also click the edit button down below. But when you're editing the color through here, you have access, of course, to the entire Windows color palette. So you could pick a very specific color if you so desire. Let's say you wanted to have this kind of turquoise-ish color here. So it would then get color coded with that specific color. You can see how that's hardly legible, but just as an example. But you can also, if you don't necessarily want to go through the entire Windows color palette, you could just type in a color there too, and you can see how when I save that, it will then, of course, change the color there in the background without having to either right-click or find that particular color on the panel. And I'm just going to remove that highlight because I'd like to be able to actually read the note. So As I was explaining, there's more that you can do with just these cases. You have a couple of different ways of reviewing them. So the one I like to point out, there is a specific report in your customer tab called Contact Management. And the Contact Management report essentially lets you run a listing of these cases that you have keyed in. You can run them by a particular group. You can run them by a particular action. You can run them by whether they're either open, closed, or open and closed, regardless. You can run it for whether you want to run it for details or totals. So details would show all of the actual notes going along with the case. You can run it either by date and or action date, and you can run it for any grouping of employees that you desire. And basically what that would do when you run that to the screen, and we'll just print it to the screen here as an example, you're going to see essentially those notes splayed out on the report, kind of going across and down. So we can see the default employee is the grouping here. It was logged to Mike Anderson. The reference number is 1000. The contact was Mike. It was a call-in action. There's the date. There's the action date. There was no close date. There's the home phone number, and that's basically just there so that you can have that handy if you were going to be using this as kind of a calling type listing. And you can see the notes that we have both for the initial and the follow-up notes there as well. So that's one thing you can do with the contact management report, or the contact management is use that report. Now, if you'd like the system to generate contact management cases for you based on sales activity, and I alluded to it earlier, but underneath that customer modules and utilities menu is contact management utilities. And this utility lets you go in and generate contact management cases. You can pick the action code that you want it to be created with, as well as the date and the action date. You can check whether it's going to be pop-up. You can put it in with any notes, both in the Notes 1 and Notes 2 fields. So basically, this is whatever you want the contact management case to be, and then you can base it off of any sales out of your system. So you can run that sales range for a particular date range. You can run it for a particular SKU or model number. You could base it off of a particular manufacturer, a particular category, if you will, both non-inventory and inventory. And then you can run it for particular customer types. You could specify whether the inventory sale value was greater than a specific dollar amount. And then you can also create them just for particular employees if you so desire. The other thing there too is you could have a check mark to create one case per quantity. So if a customer bought, let's say, 5 of something, if this is not checked, they would just get one case. And if they had bought 5 of something, then they would get one case per item sold. So this can be a great way of creating maybe contact management follow-up cases for thank you letters, or for, we want to make sure you're satisfied, follow-up correspondences, anything along those lines. And of course, one of the biggest ideas behind these types of follow-ups is to make sure that the customer's happy and to have them spread the goodwill and cheer of your industry and your business versus any of your competition in the area. So we're not going to get into those kinds of marketing strategies, because I'm certainly not one to talk about those types of things. But as far as like the contact management utility usage here, I could talk about that all day long. In fact, I use that in-house here to make sure that I'm following up with our customers that have either pre-purchased any training or anything along those lines. I want to make sure that they're getting that scheduled in a timely manner. So that's one way of again, of creating some contact management cases automatically for you based on your sales. Now, we're going to segue into email by way of a particular report that you might find extremely handy. It's going to be in your customer menu, and it's called mailing letters. So another way of using your contact management cases is to generate some mailings using this mailing letters report. When you go into mailing and letters, one of the first things you'll see is a setup tab. And on this setup tab, it's going to basically ask you some questions. What kind of output do you want? Do you want to print to Avery 5160 labels? Do you want to print to your barcode label printer? Do you want to output it to a file? Do you want it to print a letter? Do you want it to print out a customer referral list? But basically, regardless of the output type, one of the things you can do is you can choose who is going to be included on that output by checkmarking customer. And when you checkmark customer, some tabs become available up along top. Now you can, we're going to talk about this report in way more detail on a future webinar kind of specific to marketing. But you can either base your output on customers based on their internal details, so to speak, so their account range or their zip code range or their points balance or dollar balances or birthday date ranges or anything like that. You could base it on their sales history, but you can also base it on contact management cases. So you could go in and you could say, print out a listing of customers that are, let's say, call-ins, or that are customer return calls, or whatever action codes you have. And basically what this would do is this would print out or generate whatever your output is based on whatever open or closed cases you have. So you notice there's really no option here as far as open or close. It's just whether or not a case exists with that particular action, within that particular employee, within that particular initial date or action date range. So that's essentially a way of, again, using your contact management to your advantage as far as getting some kind of output, whether it's a referral list that you could then call off of, or whether you're going to be sending a letter or just using it to get mailing labels generated, or whatever the case may be. Now that will segue us, as I was mentioning, into some email functionality, because maybe you want to send some kind of email based on your contact management history. Well, when it comes to your email, as I talked about earlier, the core element, the critical detail with email is in your workstation general maintenance settings. So over here in general maintenance, your communications tab, if you've ever set up email on your computer or your smartphone or your tablet or anything like that, you may know that there are two servers related to email. There's incoming server details and there's outgoing server details. Now, as far as AIM-SI is concerned, we're not checking your email. You'll still be using Outlook or Thunderbird or your webmail client or whatever you're using that actually you're using to check your mail. But AIM-SI can send your emails all day long using your particular mail credentials. So your sender server, your outgoing mail server, the sender email address, that's basically going to be the outgoing email address coming from this particular workstation, the username and password. You want to make sure that you have the outgoing port correct, as well as a temp folder set up. Basically, that's temporarily where the computer is going to be storing the email as it's being generated. Whether or not you need to enable SSL, that's going to be up to, a lot of these settings are going to be dependent on your email client. Now you can also have a store email, and the idea behind a store email is maybe you want to carbon copy the manager or the accountant or whomever for emails going out from this particular computer. You can put in a store email there, and then in addition to any customer emails or vendor emails that you'll be sending out, the address that you have here in the store email will also be available to select from a list of outgoing email addresses. And then the description could be exactly what that store email address is for. Is it the general manager? Is it the bookkeeper? Is it the sales email? Whatever the description is of the store email. And you can also check mark whether that should be default to selected. So if you always want emails to be sent to this address in addition to the customers or the vendors or whomever, you can check mark default to selected, and then they'll always be selected initially when you're sending out emails from this computer. And then to test all this out, you can just go in and you can say to put in a particular email address you want to send a test to, and that could be your own email. Ideally, be your own email. That way you'll know if you get it right away. And then if everything works, when you click test email, it'll say email sent. If it doesn't, it'll come back with whatever the error message is that it's running into, so that you'll be able to try and troubleshoot that. Dennis is asking, we have employees who use various computers. It would be extremely helpful if there were a way to have email settings be employee specific versus workstation specific. Is this something that might be possible in V12? Dennis, that is something that I think we have looked into, and before I don't think it was possible, but I think that could be certainly something that we may be able to revisit with version 12. So if you haven't already done so, I would suggest phoning into our technical support and explain how you would like that to operate, and that's something that we can definitely look into for you. So yeah, and this is just me kind of thinking on the fly, but regarding to details here in workstations, I don't want to get too off topic from our talk about email and contact management. We do have menus, obviously, here that I've talked about in prior webinars, and there are also override menus that can be assigned to the employees. So you'll still need to have some kind of outgoing mail server information. Whether or not that's going to be redundantly established in the employee settings, I couldn't say. That's definitely something that I would definitely recommend phoning into our support line and coining that to them to see if we can look into that there for you. But yep, thank you very much, Dennis, for the suggestion there. So as I was saying, as long as this setting is in place, then you'll be able to send out emails all day long from AMSI. Now, the way emails get sent, at its most basic, anything that you can print, you can email. So whether that is a reprint of a receipt, so when you go to print a receipt, and I don't have one to print here, but when the different output options come up for your printing of that receipt, one of the options there would be for an email. So you could either print out and or email the receipt to the customer. Your reports obviously are going to be something that you probably would be emailing rather than printing. So you could email the daily report to your bookkeeper or to your accountant or to whomever. But keeping in line with today's session topic, you can also email marketing blasts to your customers. So I see some other questions coming in. Let me follow up with where I'm going with my thought here. And then Becca and Chris, I'll get to your questions in just a moment. So getting back to general maintenance, let's say that you want to send out a particular email to your customers based on the existence of a contact management case or a particular sale or anything along those lines. You can preemptively establish the contents of that email here in the general maintenance menu called HTML email. And you can essentially establish any number of email templates. They'll have a description, and the description would essentially be the subject line of the email. And then here would be the content body. And you could type in whatever you want the email to say. We'll put subject line up here. Now, this content body here, this body of content, does work with tags. So if you are familiar with tags, I talked about them a little bit in a prior webinar. I don't remember exactly which one, but one dealing with Word templates. It might have been the long-term contracts one, where there is a tag index in your AMSI folder. I'm going to switch over to that in just a second here. So on your server in the AMSI folder, let me go ahead and switch my view so you can see what it is I'm alluding to here. So in your MSI V12 folder, there is a templates folder. And in that templates folder, there is a tag index. Now that tag index, I'm going to go ahead and switch to that so you can see that. And that tag index is basically made up of a series of different tags that you can put into not only Word templates, but also into HTML email. So let's say, for example, you wanted to pull in the customer's name. You could put in the CUS underscore name in the double brackets here, the open and close brackets. And by putting that directly into, if I just go ahead and copy that, and then let's switch back to AIM-SI. So if I go ahead and basically paste that into the HTML email, then this would be replaced with the actual customer name when this gets sent out. So that's kind of the idea behind HTML email. This, of course, also does do actual HTML encoding. I'm just kind of doing plain text here, but you could also, if you are comfortable with actually generating HTML emails, you could type all the code in here. If you use a separate or an external editor for HTML, you can copy and paste the HTML code here into this body of content, and then that would format itself appropriately when the email is sent. Now, when you create this HTML email, if we go back to that report that I was talking about earlier, mailing and letters in the customer tab of the reports, you can specify that you want your output type to be that HTML email, and then you can choose that particular HTML template. You'll see it's got the subject line there, and then you can specify that customers which have a particular action code would then get that basically sent out to them. So when you go throughout that process, and you'll also want to make sure you check mark enable email down here, and maybe even one per account. If you are, let's say, if there were multiple instances of call-ins for a particular customer within the date range that you specify, by making sure you've got one per account there, they would only wind up with one email as opposed to maybe 2 or 3 or 20 if they had called in during that particular date range that you specify there. So that's kind of just kind of a taste of email. So as I mentioned, pretty much anything that can be printed can be emailed. In many cases, things that you might want to be doing mass emails of, you're usually going to see this enable email option. Like, for example, if you were printing open account statements, in lieu of actually printing them using the print OA statements report, you could check mark the enable email option. So you'll see that there kind of right in the middle of the screen. So by check marking enable email, then what that would do is that would send the statement via email, assuming that you have an address on file for the customer and that they're not set up to be saying do not send emails. And just in case you're wondering what that means, if we go take a look at an actual customer account, let's pull up Mike Anderson here again. Every customer account has an email method. So if we kind of look over here on the emails tab, there's an email method, and one of the options is do not send emails. So if the customer says, yes, you can have my email, but don't send me anything, just give me a call, you could flag it as do not send email. And then that way, even if you have the address on file for them, if you check mark this, then they'll still get their statement, in this case, actually printed and mailed to them as opposed to emailed. So that's just something you'll want to be aware of. So I wanted to point that out. Quite honestly, that's about the main elements of what I wanted to talk about today. So hopefully that gives you something to think about as far as how to make use of your contact management and email capabilities, one or the other, quite honestly. Obviously, we focused primarily on contact management today, but if you were here to learn about how email works, then hopefully this has been helpful. We're going to wrap up module mechanics this week on Friday with our coverage of the repair and service modules. So if you do have a service shop of some magnitude in your store and you have that module, or even if you don't yet have that module, I think it'll be worthwhile to check that webinar out. We'll talk about some strategies of how to set that up and make efficient use of it throughout the days so that you're spending more time actually completing services and less time keying them in or just maintaining them. And then coming up for the rest of the month of March, I haven't again yet finalized the actual schedule of what the webinars will be, but there will definitely be webinars following our typical pattern of Monday, Wednesday, Friday, starting the week of the 11th and the 25th. So 6 webinars coming up beyond March 1st, obviously, for the month of March. I guess that means 7 webinars total. So hopefully that is helpful, and let's make sure we get everyone's questions answered here. So getting back to the questions, as I mentioned, there were a couple coming in here. Excuse me. So Becca asked, our company has payment dates where thousands of clients are charged in a single day. Is there a way to send out a mass email for missed payments and receipts for those whose payments were collected? So I'm assuming, Becca, and unfortunately Becca has left already, so I'm afraid I'm only going to be able to make assumptions here. I'm assuming we're talking about contracts. So if we're talking about contracts for missed payments, that's definitely something where you could go in and make use of that mailing letters report, as I mentioned. So those could be sent out via an email, and the same thing could also be used for the payments were collected. So just for everyone else's benefit here, if we take a look at that mailing letters report, and this is just kind of a roundabout way of doing it. I'm also thinking if there's other ways of doing it where you're specifically sending an email to the customer. Actually, I think there actually is a system variable relating to auto pay receipts. Yeah, auto pay rent receipt. So both of these actually, you could set these up with a Y if you want the contract auto pays to get an emailed receipt, and if you want the declined contract auto pays to get a Word template sent, you would need to make sure that the Word document is set up specifically with the auto-generated code of declined auto pay contract on it. But then if you've got both of these set up, then yeah, the system could definitely send out emails. What I was going to mention was you could technically flag it for contract, and then with contracts, you can have a number of different date options here. So you could specify the payment date, the return date, the paid off date, the next payment date. In this case, we're talking kind of specifically about the next payment date, because if their contract did not have their payment go through, then their next payment date would not have advanced. And if their payment did go through, then it would be however often or whatever the payment frequency is, assuming it's a month out, then that would be 1 month from the current day. So that would be another way of doing it, but probably the more straightforward way is just using those system variables that I had just remembered there. So hopefully that is helpful for you, Becca, and I'm sure Becca will be checking out the recording so she gets her answer, and of course everyone else here. Chris asks, when the email is sent to the customer, will it always be the same email box setup, or will it be from the service rep who is signed on? Can that be changed? So in other words, I'm assuming when you're talking about that, Chris, you're talking about the email address that it's coming from. So that's going to be based on the address back in the workstation settings. So typically the idea there is that the workstation is kind of used for either a specific function or being used by a specific individual. So if you were, for example, sending out receipts of purchases from your front counter computers, those would usually be a more generic type of email address, like sales at awesomemusic.com or whatever the case might be in that specific instance. And then from the back office computers in the service shop, that might be bookkeeping, or it might be Jane Doe at Awesome Gun Store or Awesome Sewing or Awesome Golf Course, whatever your actual store is. But I think this also kind of goes back to what you were just saying there. What Dennis was asking, is there a way to maybe have an override there? And like I mentioned, I think that'd be something that we could certainly look into. So I think if both you, Dennis, and you, Chris, were to mention that to technical support, obviously the things that are going to be beneficial to everyone are going to be the things that take the most notice. So by having that come in a couple different times, I would say, into our support team, that'll definitely get more notice given to something as kind of like an override by employee, assuming, again, that's kind of what you're thinking of along those lines. So thank you very much for the question there, Chris. Excuse me. Jennifer asked, can we text customers using AIM-SI? And technically, yes, you can. If you are signed in with our ActiveE B2B service, there is a pay per instance service that you can use for SMS notifications. You may have even seen it kind of lurking there, for example, in that mailing letters report. But one of the functions that you can do is you can do an SMS output using SMS Notify. So basically, if you've got a cell phone on record for a customer, and then again, you basically specify what in this case, there'd be an SMS script that you'd be using for whatever it might be, their orders received or their service completed. The scripts themselves get set up over in the maintenance area, I believe, in actually underneath the XML area there for SMS scripts. You'd set them up over there. But then by setting them up and then specifying the output type of SMS and then the notify script, then what that would let you do is you'd specify who's going to get that script, and then that would get essentially sent out right away via text as opposed to an email. So I don't remember the price per text sent. I want to say it's something like 4 cents a text or 7 cents a text or something along those lines. And if you don't use it, then there's no additional fees associated with specifically the SMS service itself. Now, for version 12, and just so that the folks who are still here, because a number of them have taken off at the end of the hour here, but just for the folks who are still here, and of course for the benefit of the recording, version 12, being on the new platform that it is, we are going to be doing a lot in the mobile market as well, with things like applications for both your and your customers' smartphones. So one of the options that you will have once it is ready to go is a mobile notification. So in essence, as opposed to a text or an email, or even in addition to those, a mobile notification could be sent to the customers in question for those that have downloaded your app from the App Store, whether it's Android or iOS. That is the idea behind that. So look for that. It's not ready just yet, but that is something that we've forward thinking been thinking into here as we progress with version 12. So keep that in mind as well, Jennifer and everyone else. So I don't know yet what fees, if anything, would go along with that. That's something that we're exploring, and we're going to be looking for some feedback here in probably the not too distant future. But I figured I would just mention that since we were talking about text messages, and obviously those are kind of specific to cell phones. So hopefully this has been helpful. It looks like most everyone is kind of checking out now at this point. I don't see any other questions coming in. As always, if there's any feedback you'd like to give me, send it my way at training@technologyforretailers.com. I love to hear it. It helps me give you better content for these webinars, helps make sure that the content is viable. And I hope you make it a great day. We'll see you on Friday for the repair and service webinar.